Playoffs? We're talking about playoffs? It is the most wonderful time of the year for Louisiana high school football. It's actually cold enough now in Baton Rouge that we're at the point of the year where I don't even have to use my air condition, which I love when just the outside kind of cools us down in here. And we're looking forward to playoff games starting in just a couple of days here. I'll be at one on Thursday. The state will light up all over fields on Friday night, and then it's the 5-week march to the Superdome. So looking forward to a lot of what's ahead. This is Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit That Boot. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman. We're going to get into some of that, some of the matchups and storylines that we're really watching. But we're also going to get into some of the latest recruiting news before we get into the playoff stuff, because there have been some notable decommitments and flips the last couple of weeks. And so a ton to unpack here in mid-November and in the final weeks until not only state championships, but early signing day. So, Sam, how are we doing?
This is the best time of the year. If you're a high school football fan, if you're a recruiting fan, this is where all the marbles lie. It's as Jared alluded to, it's flip season, it's decommitment season, it's surprise visit season. All of those are taking place right below our noses, and at the same time, we are gearing up. I am hopeful. We had a little bit of a mishap last weekend with some naps and timing of that. So I did not get to go to the final regular season game here in Texas. But that has only set us up for a road trip on Friday, going up to Waco, maybe catching my first football game of the season. Cannot wait. I am super excited, not only because New Orleans is 5 weeks away, AT&T is 6 weeks away. I'm getting back into the season. I got plenty of scoop for you from my computer. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I think while you're working through some kinks of just, okay, can I actually get back out there? You're doing it at the right time, because it's, we just wrapped up the regular season, and that gives you, a week or two or whatever. We'll work out some kinks and you'll be back in full form by Thanksgiving, at least, when it starts to really become kind of crunch time. And that's when, and again, we'll get into the brackets a little bit more at the end of this, but when I start looking at quarterfinals around the state of Louisiana, I want to be every single place all over the state by the time some of these things shake down and you're looking at the top 8 teams in all 8 brackets. But let's get into some of the decommitments and just kind of quick hitting through some of those. In recent weeks, Scott Smith Jr., the central defensive lineman, backed off of the pledge to Houston. Jamarcia Plater, the running back from Captain Shreve, backed off of the pledge to Wake Forest. We had a couple of changes in college plans for Edna Carr standouts in that offensive backfield. John Johnson, the quarterback, decommits from Liberty. Trey Garrison, the running back, backs off of the Nickel State pledge pretty quickly, makes his move to flip to Washington State, who has come in of late with a bunch of offers around particularly the New Orleans area. And then the biggest yet, Big Dylan Berryman up there in Monroe, the Ouachita Parish defensive tackle, decommitted last Wednesday night from Texas. And so he becomes now the top available uncommitted senior in the state of Louisiana. Again, less than a month until the early signing period, and it will be interesting to watch how that all plays out. We've kind of alluded to it in recent weeks. We're kind of getting into flip season, and so not a surprise to see some late movement, but when you start to see some of those dominoes falling different directions or whatnot around Louisiana, what kind of catches your attention? What stands out?
What's going on in those buildings to lead to these decommitments and flips? You started with Dylan Berryman, one of the few Texas verbal commitments out of Louisiana. We know since Steve Sarkisian and Brandon Harris have been in Austin, Texas loves to recruit Louisiana. They have a commitment from Hayward Howard out of Edna Carr. Dylan Berryman was one of their favorite interior D-line targets in this class. He's made, I believe, 3 visits to Oxford this season. He's also very close with the staff at Purdue, which was nearly trending before he committed to the Longhorns. Nebraska just threw an offer at Dylan Berryman. I'm told there's interest from Dylan Berryman's circle there in the Huskers. And stop traffic, they are going to name a new head coach in Baton Rouge in the next couple of weeks. And I'm told to keep an eye out for the Tigers with Dylan Berryman, one of the first offers in the state for the 2026 class. That chapter now being rewritten with now that Brian Kelly is on his way out. But Dylan Berryman, probably the biggest of the 2026 recruits, making noise this week. But talking about the Houston situation. Houston's gearing up to land a big fish on the defensive line, so we see them moving in a different direction from is it Sean Smith out of Central Baton Rouge? Scott Smith, Sean, Scott, Sam. We're all starting with an S. It's all synonymous. Another S.
You sound like my my papa when we were growing up, because my little brother is Josh and our cousin who's in between us in age is Johnny, and so it's just a lot of Jarrett, Johnny, damn it, somebody.
I can't even get my dogs and the kid's name all in the right half the time, so it's difficult with first names sometimes. But besides that, we're seeing John Johnson, another one, certainly as Edna Carr prepares to return to the Superdome in a couple of weeks, playing out of his mind again as a senior. This is the story. We know that John Johnson plays at this level. It'll be really interesting that during this playoff run, a lot of schools are going to be paying close attention to John. I'm sure he's counting on a deep playoff run to see if he can get a couple more suitors, whether it's before the early signing window or if he elects to wait until February to sign.
Yeah, there's going to be an awful lot to unpack, and all these guys have sort of different storylines going on. For Scott, unfortunately, I mean, he's battled injuries all this year, and it really kind of hamstrung him going into the camp season and everything this summer. And I mean, has hamstrung obviously his senior year. Has been tough to watch that young man, who has been great to talk to anytime we've had the chance to have to miss the bulk of this senior year. It sucks to see that play out that way. Always sucks to see guys. Jamarcier has been kind of an interesting deal. I'm looking forward to seeing where he ultimately lands. There was a stretch where we were wondering, was a Colorado or an Ole Miss going to come in and pry him from Wake Forest? And I'm not sure now at this point what kind of the next step for him is, but he's someone that can definitely play. He's in 2 years of the position, rewritten the Captain Shreve record books as a running back after playing at DB his underclassmen years. And so super talented kid with a lot in front of him still in terms of his development at that position. Dylan is obviously the headliner and will be really interesting to watch. You throw the LSU name into that mix. That for him, he's someone that I thought for a while was going to be a part of the LSU class early on, but then his recruiting process took so many twists and turns. And I think it's been an interesting process for him just kind of growing up over the course of the last couple of years and kind of the way he handles some of this stuff. And so watching how some of these relationships now in sort of the pressure cooker of just a month left to figure this out if he's going to sign early will be super interesting. And then, yeah, you mentioned the Carr guys. Trey has been kind of a late bloomer for that team, played some last year, stepped into the lead role this year. And John, I mean, they've got to get through, obviously, some tests to get back to the Superdome. Everybody is going to start looking at a potential quarterfinal where Evangel would possibly come to New Orleans on the day after Thanksgiving. And you're looking at probably the top 2 Class 5A offensive MVP candidates there that would be on the same field on day after Thanksgiving. But that's all of this is part of why the next couple of weeks are fun in terms of the competition, but also which college coaches are going to be making their rounds through here for some late visits and trying to make some swings.
Yeah, I think you hit it right in the head. Probably the most puzzling of all the decommitments and flips and moving in different directions would be Jamarcier. We spoke about it, I think, last month, where he had rewritten Kendrick Law's records at Captain Shreve, which anytime you are in the same sentence as Kendrick Law, you are doing something very special. And Jamarcier has had a special senior season at Captain Shreve. Ole Miss, Colorado, Boise State were all talking very heavily to Jamarcier and ended up not making his OV to Boise, not taking his OV to Colorado. Wake Forest electing to go through the transfer portal for running back help right away kind of speaks to what's going on in high school football recruiting, that, a couple of years ago, November and December was money time for these seniors like Jamarcier or John or Dylan having great senior seasons. Schools are going to come full throttle for you. But in today's day and age, that takes a backseat a little bit to the transfer portal and the ability to not only win, but win right now, as this LSU situation proved. Not every head coach or recruiting class gets 2 or 3 years to reach its full potential. So someone is going to end up with a steal in Jamarcier Plater. If I'm a college football GM or personnel director, I'm making that phone call to Captain Shreve and saying, how do I get Jamarcier on my campus in the next month? But the beautiful thing is, even though the early signing window is within a month, there's still going to be plenty of opportunities for these kids to sign in February after this portal business gets handled.
Louisiana Tech, the Raging Cajuns, all these schools should be hitting up Captain Shreve right now to see if they can potentially land him. I think he probably would like to stay a little bit closer to home. Obviously, he's going to see what the opportunities look like and make the best choice. But if I'm one of these Louisiana schools, whether it be one of those CUSA or Sunbelt, or at the FCS level, maybe even a Southland kind of gets the mega steal of a guy like Jamarce, who to me I've had ranked as my top running back in Louisiana senior class this year. There's definitely options there for programs that want high school seniors coming out. But as you mentioned, and we were just texting about this yesterday, as I kind of talked to a dad of a talented senior prospect, that it really sucks where high school football recruiting has gotten for the high school seniors, because as I talk to coaches and ask, hey, is there something you're still looking for in this 26 class? What's kind of the last hole? Is there somebody that can I interest you in a running back? Can I interest you in a DB? Like, what are we looking for out there, guys? And it's all, well, we'd like, a portal this, we'd like 2 portals that, a portal this. And that's, not just the high major type schools, that's the Southland schools and everybody too. And so it's gotten really tight to try and find homes for some of these guys. And last year was the fewest FBS signees and the fewest D1 total signees I can remember since I've been looking at those full lists and been around it. I went from telling guys, 150 or so guys in Louisiana signed D1 every year. So like the fact that you're ranked 67th or whatever is still a good, like you might be a Louisiana Tech guy type place to be ranked. And that has really shortened up. Those tiers have shifted up a lot, and it's been tough. It's tough for us to see. It's obviously that much tougher to be those guys who are trying to find their homes to take their talents to the next level.
No, you're exactly right. Part of what we're talking about being the best time of the year is, it used to be, think about Danny Lewis from Westgate a couple of years ago, picking up Alabama, Florida, and LSU, all while Westgate is marching to the Superdome. Those days they're not behind us. They're not gone entirely, but they are certainly not as prominent as they were even when Danny Lewis, who is still on Alabama's roster, was going through this process. And to your point, I'd love to hear more about this conversation with the dad, more candidly and more specifically. But to your point, I spoke to a coach in the Southland Conference yesterday and a GM in the Big 12 yesterday, and both were like, you know what, that's a good player, good high school football player. Not sure if he'll fit. We'll figure that out. But we're 60-40 between the portal and this high school prospect, and they'll make a determining factor at a visit later this month. And I get it from the team construction period. Transfer portal guys can usually play sooner rather than later. But the beauty of these programs that tend to compete is that they have talent in the queue, in the batter circle, being developed, and we're seeing teams stray away from that more long-term plan, especially closer to signing day. So it begs me or compels me rather, to tell the parents, like the ones in your DMs, not mine, to maybe, when there's an opportunity to camp or take a spot in the summer or the spring, if and you're sure, take that spot. And if you change your mind, then change your mind, but don't wait and let someone else take that opportunity.
Yeah, I've had to change my advice thought process a lot over the last few years. I would have never told anyone years past to go anywhere with the mentality of, you can just transfer at some point if you need to, but that's such a part of this now. I would have not told people to commit somewhere where it's not where they think they're going to be on signing day. But at some point, it very much became, you have to kind of take what is there when it's there, because it is far more effusive and elusive than ever before. And so you kind of have to take what's there and get into the game of musical chairs that is kind of whirling year round now. But it's tough, man. And I feel bad for guys that are going through that would have potentially been a Louisiana Tech signee a few years ago, and now are thinking, maybe I need to go JUCO and figure this out and hopefully get my D1 chance in a year or two. despite being automatic or academic qualifiers. That's something we could probably talk about pretty much any time of year and any week of the season, but this is playoff season. And so let's start talking about some of these brackets too. While again, the recruiting process has changed so much, there are going to be opportunities here for some guys to show out and kind of put themselves on some new radars here down the stretch, even if it might not be the same radar they were hoping at one point. But there's going to be great games all over the state. There's going to be a few good ones this week in the first round, but then every week it's just going to ramp up to a point where, as I mentioned, by the time you get to Thanksgiving, I want to be everywhere every week. And that's going to be some tough decisions. But I've been deep into these brackets the last couple of days. Folks that want to check out a really deep reaction show, go check out the bracket release episode on Sunday with Chance Hester. We dive into all 8 brackets at length for literally over 2 hours. We're not going to do that here today. But Sam, as you kind of look at some of these and the way it has shaken out to get to this point and the way you see it kind of shaking out moving forward, what are the first things that catch your eye about the Louisiana playoff brackets in 2025?
Well, one, when I was in New Orleans, there was multiple fights that occurred in my household when Thanksgiving weekend came and where I wanted to go in the state the next morning. And I have won many of those fights. So I know what they feels like, and I'm jealous because that is truly the best weekend of the year between Thanksgiving and the playoff games. And something I am looking forward to this year is in Texas, they do almost tournaments of games that Friday and Saturday. So I'm hoping to make up for lost time and maybe catch like 2 double headers on a Friday and a Saturday Thanksgiving weekend. Looking at my brackets, I think I'm going to steal some of your thunder, so I won't start there, but let's give a couple of shout outs to Lowell Narcisse and those Thibodeau Tigers Lowell is now coaching Thibodeau in the first round. I think they are a team with some staying power and have some potential to make a little bit of a run here if they can get past a certain Neville team on the road. But we were talking about this before we started, and I know you're going to get to your shout out coming up, but these young coaches that are taking a part in the LHSA with these traditional and some non-traditional powerhouse teams, very exciting when you think about it. We're going to go into the brackets a little bit further. We have our Rustins who are injury depleted going into a bye week. We know that Destrehan is ready for a run. We're ready for North DeSoto to make another run. But seeing a team like Thibodeau that has a chance, if they can pull off an upset against Neville, really excited about that. Let's see where else I have to talk about. And then I wanted to, I can't steal it from you. I'm going to pass the torch to you for the other game that we're really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's games all over the place that are really
Right.
exciting, and just out of the gate, there aren't the huge wealth of sexy matchups in round 1 that we're going to have by the time we get to the quarters, but there are some good ones. You do such a great job of ticking somebody off all the time, and so you're overlooking Mandeville for Thibodeau trying to get to Neville, but that's one of the fun ones around the state. Certainly, talent on both of those rosters, and the one that I'm going to be at Thursday night is what you're kind of alluding to in terms of a young coach doing his thing. Riverdale and Bonneville will have to play for the second straight week after this past week. Bonneville gets a win under Coach Andre Anthony, who's been on the channel before talking about enjoying his opportunity. Former Edna Carr and LSU standout, is now a young coach for those Bruins, and they won their first district championship since 1998 by beating Riverdale just a few days ago. And so incredible things that they're doing there right off the bat with Dre and company. And then at the same time, I'm messaging with Coach Longo at Riverdale, getting set up. It's a home game for those guys, and they'll have an opportunity to try and get a quick get back against Bonneville. They're looking for their first playoff win in program history and have a chance to try and get it done on their home field. And so on a Thursday night, that'll be a little bit lighter on the schedule overall. That's one that carries major historic implications of either a first since 1997 was their last playoff win for Bonneville, which was, we looked it up, Dre was born, but was very young at the time that happened. And so as much as I always tell coaches, if you're doing something that hasn't happened in the players' lifetimes, it's a big deal. When you're doing something that hasn't happened in the coach's lifetime, almost, it's that much bigger of a deal. But I'll be there on Thursday. Friday, speaking of rematches, I'll be at Acadiana and Karen Crow. Some great talent on both of those rosters. Darius McKinley, fresh off of a kind of game-wrecking performance against Karen Crow in Week 10. I think was up over 10 tackles in the backfield for a ton of stops. And so he and those Wrecking Rams, Colin DeBetta and company, playing host to the familiar foes in Karen Crow, a guy, Chance Babineau, who's all over the field that we've talked about a bunch on here, the Nicholls State commitment. This is the third time in 4 years that those district rivals will play again early in the playoffs, and that just continues to build that much more intensity every time you have to see the same guys twice in a span of a couple weeks.
I noticed that you didn't remind our listeners that Dre started his high school career at the now no longer operating Miller McCoy in the East. I can remember our old editor at NOLA.com asking me to write a feature on that school and their team, only to then realize that they were in the process of being shut down, which was one of my first breaking news pieces in the NOLA.com beat of high school football in New Orleans. But it's just been absolutely incredible. I know I did a terrible job of touching on Lowell and his journey at Thibodaux, but to the same tune on Andre Anthony, who we both got to cover at Miller McCoy and Carr, and also for all of his time in Baton Rouge, is just one of the reasons why this job is so fun. And that even when the most talented, the most infectious, the most easy to root for kids do not pan out, whether it's in college or the NFL or whatever, because those are extremely difficult. Both of these young men, who are two of my favorites all time to ever cover from this state, are now leading young men. And we know, not to steal from Archie Manning, high school football is great. And to be at the helm of these programs, shaping memories and teaching morals and imparting a lot of lessons that they both went through during this recruiting process and as an athlete. Both of these guys did not have the easiest of roads, despite being highly ranked players and prospects on the field or off of it, whether it's injuries or adversity. So I just love the opportunity. Not only are they winning, but they are getting exceptional coaching and life lessons from both Junior and Dre, who, like me, is a new father. So shout out to him that he's out coaching on Friday nights. I couldn't even imagine that. But it's this is what's great. And, it gets me all giddy. We're talking about first round matchups, and it's going to get even more exciting next week when a couple of these top seeds come off the bye, which I should have been more prepared about to talk about because I have a lot of these bye week teams circled. But this is what's great. The postseason is starting. The season's all over. So whether you're an injured Ruston team starting up or an upstart Bonneville team trying to make history, everyone's records are 0-0, and we'll see y'all in the Superdome for whoever survives the next month.
There you go. Yeah, look, there's great coaches all over the state. Dre and Junior are two guys that I think exemplify a lot of what you were just talking about, and they've both been through a lot, and they're both guys that I think even as teenagers, if you had told us that guy is going to be a head coach at one of these schools, a few years down the line, it wouldn't have been particularly surprising just because of the energy that they brought to their teams and the way that entire teams rallied around them and behind them, and just kind of the way they carried themselves and handled their business. And when I say their business, not just the football side of it, but the way they are as people and navigating adverse times. When you look at some of these top teams that, you think we're going to be potentially talking about come Superdome time, who are some of the schools that you think have some potential staying power in these brackets that are going to be possible semifinalists, possible dome teams? I'll be posting Louisiana versus all y'all predictions for each bracket throughout the week, but I don't know how much you get asked about your thoughts on the actual, the high school football side of it anymore, and just teams and games you're looking forward to. So wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of share if there were any teams you're looking forward to potentially seeing make some deeper runs or matchups that could be in play along the way. I mentioned that Edna Carr and Evangel potential as a quarterfinal. That's one that I think will dominate social media on Thanksgiving weekend if we get that, as I expect we will. But there's a lot to look forward to. Certainly, anything that kind of catches your eye in that regard.
Yeah, I think that excuse me, Central BR. I know we talked about Scott Smith being injured. I think that they might have with the injuries in Ruston, might have a shot at returning to the Superdome. Again, Neville has played really well this season on the other side of the bracket, so it seems like they're going to be, the favorite to emerge from that side of the bracket. But I'm not ready to sleep on Destrehan. I feel like they got a lot of momentum toward the back end of the season. And I'm also keeping a little bit of an eye on West Monroe and just the season that Trez Davis is having. I don't know how many teams are going to be able to defend this young man. And this is more of a West Monroe team than we're accustomed to. So I think that, as tradition shows, the Division I non-select bracket is open to a little bit of welcome chaos. I'm really excited. We know that talking about number 1 seeds, North DeSoto back on top. The last time they were number 1 seed, we saw Luke Delafield and company in the Superdome. One of the most, the game that really jump-started him as a recruit to get in our eyes. I'm thinking that they have a return possibly, and I'm curious to see what the other side of the bracket shapes up on Division II. But I know your boys from Franklin Parish. I have as maybe making a little bit of a run. You talked about all the history that's been made this year with Pook Ellis, and they have a fantastic running back in Trey Martin coming off an Alabama visit. I think they have the star power and the right formula as a team to maybe surprise us with that D2 bracket. Listen, I'm sticking with the number 1 seeds. I think that Haynesville is destined to be back in the Dome. I've made that drive a few times. I'm not jealous of them, but they love it, and I don't blame them. I would not be surprised if maybe South Plaque was back again in terms of footing for a run. And then to steal your thunder, yeah, I am certainly looking at that Edna Carr Evangel matchup in the semifinals or the quarters, whatever you said. But I already took it a step further. You already know where I'm going. I'm thinking that we're getting another Catholic League rematch in the Division I select, and I'm all for it. I'm looking at Carr against the fighting Robert Valdez's of AP Terad. I just think that St. Aug, even though they're going to be without Ray, they can run the ball, they can throw the football. Miguel is having a sensational season out wide, and even without his battery mate, that defense, that running game, and the playmaking that Miguel Whitley brings, the gauntlet that St. Aug has been through and is still on top, I think that they could be running into a familiar face in the Superdome, which we know when Carr and Landry Walker met in the Dome, that place was rocking. Carr and Aug in the Superdome, prime time, you and me hitting wands for margaritas after. I'm talking about a party day. I'm talking about feeling alive again, Jarrett.
The beauty of that Saturday this year too is whatever the big matchups are, it's the early matchups. It's like a 12 and a 3 kick or whatever the heck it ends up being. So we've got more Wands time afterward when
we'll be recording from Wands, of course. We'll be recording the post-game pod.
The potential of that Carr and Aug matchup in the Superdome is one that I think, for folks that aren't associated with other schools in the Division I select bracket, has piqued the interest already, certainly around New Orleans, of the potential of what that atmosphere and that rematch could look like. Aug gave Carr as close of a matchup as any in-state opponent did this year. Unfortunately for Aug and all the other in-state opponents, that was a 21-point differential still. But I know that Aug feels like some things didn't really go their way. And if, a play here, play there is a little bit differently, and you're able to kind of cash in on the goal line or connect in some different places, that's maybe a different game down the stretch. And so I know they would love that opportunity to get back to the Dome for the first time in forever and to have another shot at Edna Carr. Long way to go before we get there. Some phenomenal matchups all over the place. And some of these paths, you kind of mentioned a couple different teams. The fact that there's so much familiarity in some of these paths makes it so much more intriguing and tough to call in spots where, like, you could have a Neville and West Monroe quarterfinal, a game that Neville was able to pull out late, but West Monroe feels like they let that one get away. And so now they would have potentially, if both those teams can advance, another opportunity. And it's just tough to get a high school team when you have two really good, evenly matched, potentially teams kind of in that same ballpark to get a win against that same team with your teenage group to be fired up to make sure that they don't let anything off the gas or whatever. So there's spots like that all over this state. You mentioned Central. They're in a quadrant in that D1 non-select bracket where there's an awful lot of Baton Rouge representation and teams that know each other super well, whether from the same district or guys that were on the same 7-on-7 team or whatever the case may be. So Central's got to start with Dutchtown, may have to then face Bryson Martinez and company with EA. Then do you have maybe Zachary or Denham, two teams that are old district rivals and know each other well? And while Zachary's down there to 13 seed, I mean, they won some big games at points this season and narrowly missed knocking off Central just a couple weeks ago. And so there could be some chaos here from a seeding standpoint. There always is some, but this year, as much as any other, if not more so than any other, there are some matchups that could be at play that are super familiar, super evenly matched, and could swing things quite a bit.
I'm glad you brought up Zachary. Normally, as a 13 seed, I'm jumping at the bit to pick them for an upset. This is March Madness. I'm going David Brew and the Broncos all day, every day. Seems like a cheat code. I'm having a hard time putting their regular season finale against Catholic behind me. That was a dismantling by the Bears. We know what Zachary is capable of. We know that they are one of the most well-coached teams in the state. Not ruling out a surprise upset there. I'm wondering about how far they could actually advance to. That doesn't seem like one of their state championship level teams of years past, but I'm not the one who's going to bury the Broncos this early. And then I did forget to bring this up. The Division II Select. I'm just going to go. I just did a big one line. I have the Fighting Wayne Steins playing in New Orleans. Talk to me later if you have a question about that. Am I crazy?
How could I?
Ask me, am I crazy, Jarrett, to think that Shaw could be back in the Superdome? Who do you have on that side of the bracket? Because I'm ready to call Mama and Coach Hank and say, let's go see in the Superdome. I'm not ruling out this Shaw. It's not as good of a Shaw team as that won the state title last year, but I'm wondering who's going to step up and beat the Fighting Hank Tierney's in that side of the bracket.
Your points about Zachary and Shaw very similar to me from a standpoint of we see it all the time where it's either a team that we're expecting, okay, they're kind of gearing toward next year or 2 year, whatever. We kind of have this calendar in mind if that's going to be the year where they're really great. And then we see teams get there, if not even complete the job, a year ahead of schedule. And how often do we talk about that? And then the amount of times that we talk about teams that, oh man, they graduated so much. This isn't the same team as last year. This isn't one of the best teams the program's had over the last, couple years or whatever the case may be. But there's just something about some of these programs and the way that they're coached and the culture around those programs, for lack of a better word, where even if it isn't their top team, they find a way to win some tough games come playoff time and surprise some people and have a team that isn't their best team or isn't last year's team or whatever and still go make a run. And I am sitting there with right now, and this is, I guess, my opportunity to piss some people off too. I have Zachary and Central written down as a quarterfinal, and I'm realizing, man, that game was really close a couple weeks ago for Central to pull that out. And I have Shaw listed on a semifinal line, and I'm looking at, could they really go make a run back to the Dome this year? I like the way my bracket is writing up. I think I have them going there and getting right back to Poydras Street, but I've just, I haven't expected this to be that type of Shaw team, but I think that they're capable of doing that again. And that's part of the beauty of the playoffs too, man. It may not even be your best team historically. You may not be a 1 seed. You may have to start, playing a game in week 1 and hit the road in week 2 and whatnot. But as long as you're there on that Friday night, you have a chance to be the one that's kind of moving on as the dust settles. And there's some twists and turns ahead for sure.
Yeah, seeding always comes into play, of course, but and the way these brackets always shape out, the path is always there. Who are the bullies that you have to get past? But I'm with you. I tend to, at this point, side with the culture of some of these programs. I know that in the pregame speech before Shaw takes the field or before the Broncos take the field is going to light up that team, whether they have Chris Hilton or Hilton Chris playing wide receiver. I think it's sometimes that, you expect the team with all the talent to always make it there, but sometimes it's the year before or the year after that they end up realizing their potential. In the case of Shaw, obviously they're coming off that championship season, which, to those young guys like Jackson Williams and Shark Carter, they know what it takes to get there. And now they're only a few games away. So, I'm a believer. I'm a believer in the brand. I am going to text Hank Tierney when we get off and jinx him and tell him I'm rooting for him. And I won't expect to speak to him until the Superdome when he finally forgives me.
Yeah, I think we kind of know what to expect from Jackson and Rontre. But even the guys that we don't know that were a part of that team that went and did it last year, and maybe, some guys that were just kind of role players, played a few snaps, whatever, some guys that were just a part of that roster, that meant something to them to have been through a playoff run and to see what it takes to see guys like Mason Wilson and Jasper Parker and Jacob Washington and know and now be able to follow Jackson and Rontre and company. It just kind of is something that is such a boost to me, to the entire locker room, to have been through that before. Even if you're not the guys making the big touchdown plays, once you got there, it just kind of prepares you for that next run. I think that's about all we got. One other just kind of interesting dynamic to me for folks building out playoff brackets. We talk about some of those rematches and how much those can swing some things. It's interesting sometimes how the trickle effect works of, like, for me, I'm looking at a second round matchup in Division 4 non-select between number 7 East Feliciana and number 10 Faraday. Have no idea who's going to win that game, but then that changes the matchup potentially in the quarters for a Mangum as a 2 seed. Do they come out of that thing? Do they reach the semifinals? And then if they do, South Plaquemine as a 3 seed would potentially have to take a long trip up to Mangum to get a semifinal win. If Mangum is to fall earlier and South Plaque makes the semis, people would have to come down through South Plaque. And so suddenly where that game is being played gets swung based on an earlier round game. And that potentially changes the entire complexion of the rest of the playoff bracket. And so these are all things that I'm struggling with right now as I try to finish up and make final predictions. But I'll be sorting through them and getting some final predictions on Louisiana versus all y'all here in the coming days. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say before we get into it, but it's playoff time, man.
To quote the great Chris Berman, a.k.a. the Swami, and that's why they play the games.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jared Roser. This is Louisiana versus all. Recruit that boot. Until next time, y'all be well. Get out to some playoff games this week, and looking forward to seeing everybody in the Dome here sooner than later.